announcing the arrival of Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim, Leader of the Opposition, Parliament of Malaysia. Honorable Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim, Leader of the Opposition, Parliament of Malaysia. Professor Wu Wing Tai, Executive Director of Penang Institute. Dr. Ahmad Farouk Musa, Chairman and Director of the Islamic Renaissance Front. Members of the Parliament, members of state assemblies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, ladies and gentlemen, members of this august House. Welcome to our program for today, a forum on the economic management during political transition, organized jointly by Penang Institute, the Islamic Renaissance Front, and Institute Rakyat. First and foremost, allow me to introduce myself. I am Muhammad Anas Daniel from the Islamic Renaissance Front, and my colleague here is Ms. Trisha Yoh from Institute Rakyat, and we will be your masters of ceremony for today. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed further with today's event, allow me to take a little bit of your time to introduce our respective organizations who are organizing the event for today. Firstly, allow me to introduce the Islamic Renaissance Front. Based in Kuala Lumpur, the Islamic Renaissance Front is an intellectual movement and think tank focused on youth empowerment and the promotion of Muslim intellectual discourse. Officially launched by Professor Dr. Tariq Ramadan in 12th of December 2009, IRF has taken great strides to engage in discussions in Malaysia and beyond to promote democracy, liberty, and social justice. Our next organization, which is the Penang Institute, it is the public policy think tank of the state government of Penang. Established in 1997 as the Socio-Economic Research Institute, short formed as SERI, it has now been rebranded to better reflect the aspirations of the state to transform Penang into an international and intelligent city. With the tagline, "Making Ideas Work," PI seeks to spur bold thinking in key areas of economics, sociopolitics, and sustainable development.
Selamat sejahtera and good afternoon, YB Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim, my fellow colleagues from IRF, Dr. Farouk Musa, fellow MC Anas, friends from Penang Institute, Prof. Wu, Zairil, Khair Johari, as well as, of course, members of my own team from Institute Rakyat, our board of directors, Mr. Wong Hoi Cheong, Encik Azrul Azwar, our research consultant, and others, friends, colleagues, members of the media, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It is my pleasure to give a short introduction to the very newly formed Institute Rakyat. Institute Rakyat is a think tank that was launched just 3 weeks ago by Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim here himself. It is a new think tank that is affiliated to Parti Keadilan Rakyat, or PKR, one of the members of the Pakatan Rakyat Opposition Coalition. And it is a think tank that seeks to present independent policy reviews, research, analysis, and events such as this. And we thank PI and IRF for collaborating with us at today's inaugural event for Institute Rakyat. You would have seen outside some leaflets, and I hope that you can take this with you. We are quite ambitious in trying to cover a whole range of issues ranging from the economy, social, environmental, and cultural fronts, including media, which is very important. From the Institute Rakyat perspective, We are glad to be here today. As mentioned by my fellow MC, today's issue is on economic management during political transition. He will speak a little bit, and I will give you the perspective from IR. Thank you.
Thank you, Tricia. Ladies and gentlemen, referring back to our program for today, economic management during political transition, experiences from East Asia and Eastern Europe. This event is organized considering uncertainty in the future politics of the country, Malaysia, facing the coming general election due latest this year in June, which promises to be a highly contested and most competitive ever since the earliest days of this country. So many parties have raised concerns in case of a change in government and how this would affect the fate of Malaysia's economy throughout this wave of transition. We therefore feel the need to alleviate the fear and uncertainty that would affect the economy should there be a regime change.
Thank you, Anas. From Institute Rakyat's perspective, being affiliated with Parti Keadilan, we are clearly interested in what happens should a transition take place. We feel that policy dialogues such as these are imperative for ourselves as well as for people from the public, from the diplomatic corps, from think tanks, and so on, civil society, to discuss and to dialogue and to think about very important questions that we are going to raise today, chief of which is on economic, finance, and trade policy. Some key questions that we will be addressing today with our distinguished panel speakers are: how can we ensure that economic policies will remain inclusive? For all this time, we've only had economic policy under one Barisan Nasional coalition. What are the sort of values and objectives that will guide the transition? Are the policies that we're going to implement leaning towards a welfare-based policy? Will it be more a liberalized economy? And I think looking at countries surrounding us, countries like Indonesia, Thailand, countries that have gone through political transition in the past, it is valuable for Malaysia to look at how our friends and colleagues have also gone through these experiences. As you know, Pakatan Rakyat has also just launched its manifesto, many contents of which are regarding the economy and how the new coalition will guide economic policy in the future should it take power. These are issues that must be discussed openly, transparently, and we believe that this is the right medium to do so. As such, I thank you for joining us, and I hope that you will continue to support the work and efforts of Institute Rakyat and our fellow colleagues IRF and PI. Thank you.
Thank you, Tricia. So, without further ado, I would like to invite Yang Berhormat Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim to give his keynote address.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera. Adim-adim Mesyuarat Kerajaan Negeri, Dr. Xavier, Profesor Wu, Profesor Anwar Nasution, Dr. Farouk, tetamu-tetamu kehormat, saudara-saudari dihormati sekalian. Saya anggap wacana ini sesuai pada ketikanya kerana kita sekarang sedang di saat dan ketika yang getir dalam menghadapi pilihan raya yang dijangka akan diadakan pada bila-bila masa. Saya anggap tajuk yang dipilih oleh rakan-rakan itu tambah meyakinkan kerana sebaik diberikan gambaran ada andaian transisi, maknanya ada keyakinan akan berlakunya perubahan. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as I've alluded earlier, the theme of the discussion, the discourse this afternoon is most reassuring because it does indicate that you have some semblance of confidence that change is going to take place. Otherwise, there's no need to discuss transition. So I must thank you profoundly for this additional impetus to support our clamor for change in this country. Now, the present UMNO BN government of Datuk Seri Najib Razak is living on borrowed time. It does not want to admit it, but its legitimacy is now totally in question because constitutionally its full term has expired. How long more do the people have to bear the whips and scorns of this outrageous fortune? Indeed, the people's patience is tested to the limit here by the audacity of a government that goes on ruling without a mandate. A number of bogus analysts and self-appointed doomsday prophets, especially those driven by personal agendas, have warned that Malaysia will descend into political and economic chaos in the event of a Pakatan Rakyat victory. This is not unusual. You've heard this from Hosni Mubarak, Suharto, Marcos. No change except the stark realities, and live with them. It is better, as my old colleague Mahathir said, it's better to deal with the devil that you know. And precisely, there are too many people who actually decide to reject devils. On the other hand, the more genuine and independent observers have expressed greater optimism. For instance, the original Dr. Doom, Professor Rubini, who was just here last week, says that our economy will stay robust even with a change in government. We know that the mandate for change is not limited to the political sphere, though it is true that without that mandate, economic management itself will be tainted with illegitimacy. When Indonesia, I'm speaking in behalf of, in front of a very outstanding economist who has an authority in dealing with the transition in Indonesia, Professor Anwar Nasution, made that break from military autocracy to constitutional democracy. Much of the focus of the free world was on how its economy would weather the transition. And in their case, transition would stretch for years. And indeed, the fruits of that initial process of political upheaval are for all to see, though I would acknowledge they're still having to deal with the issue of underdevelopment, of marginalization, and in many instances, endemic corruption. In the case of the Arab Spring, the major worry remains the lack of clearly defined policies that would set the roadmap to economic recovery and growth. They are still finding their way, and it won't be an easy way, but it is no excuse for rejecting freedom and democracy. Certainly, political stability is a key factor, and I might just emphasize the most crucial factor in setting the direction and objectives of economic management. But this is not to be confused with the argument by apologists and pundits alike that because political stability is so crucial, therefore there should not be any change of government. This is false logic, because the test of political stability is in fact the ability of a nation to experience a change of government peacefully through the ballot box. No matter what the UMNO PN propaganda says, we the Pakatan Rakyat believe in this peaceful process, and we are confident that the people are matured and ready for this change. What is heartening, of course, the presence of 5 very senior generals headed by the former chief of the army, which is unprecedented in our history. They came on board, called on the people to support Pakatan Rakyat, and gave a very clear, categorical message and assurance that there will be peaceful transition when Pakatan Rakyat takes over soon. Now, the question that needs to be answered first is, what are the economic consequences of a peaceful political transition? I think the obvious response is that, number one, the status quo may be maintained, That is, nothing exciting, the same policies are intact, and no one wants to rock the boat. The economy may worsen or remain stagnant, or it may improve marginally by lacking in luster. Or number two, things could head south, i.e. go downhill. The new government has no clue how to run the economy and throws caution to the wind. They try to outdo the previous government's fiscal irresponsibility and takes the country down to even greater depth of deficit. Or finally, a third scenario is possible. The new government seizes the day, carries out the economic policies and reforms it has laid out in its election manifesto. If things are done properly, with full commitment to achieve broad-based and sustainable growth, we may well see economic transition. Propel the economy upwards, but maintain and be more concerned or committed to the principle of distributive justice. In other words, a mere change of government will not lead to chaos in the economy. Certain conditions precedent must be met, of course. There must be due democratic process, and to my mind, this is best translated as good governance and the rule of law. No doubt, the question of policy clarity takes precedence. Economic management must be based on sound policies, not knee-jerk reactions. There must also be continuity, but this is subject to a major caveat. Only bona fide, above-board undertakings, ventures and enterprises will be continued. Rent-seeking and other crony-driven schemes will meet their market maker sooner than later. That would include, of course, some of the fraudulent, what we consider provisions, even in the IPPs. It is contentious because people suggest that a new government must honor all old agreements, but I would affirm that positively with a caveat. If we find the provisions clearly flawed or agreed upon through faulty or corrupt means, no way can a responsible government continue to support that process. You can see umpteen privatizations, AES inclusive, that must be reviewed. We know that the Najib administration has been taking our economy down the deficit path. And now, as the elections draw nearer, with the kind of money that would have been doled out, we would inherit an economy which would be in even greater deficit. So efforts must be geared towards arresting this trend, the longer-term objective of finally turning it around. There will be no continuity of the UMNO BN model, which has prevented Malaysia from attaining to a higher income status. What we have lost over the years in terms of strategic advantage, we must strive to gain back. We are a nation blessed with resourceful people. We must not allow this to drain away. In this process, it is of the greatest importance that there is good governance, sound, clear, transparent policy. I have since 2007 called upon the dismantling of what I consider obsolete new economic policy, and I think by reiterating that point, you can find TV3 tonight, and Anwar is now destroying the last pillar of Malay supremacy. We can talk till the cows come home. No pun intended. Cows are
just leave the bullshit.
Or till our faces turn dark blue. Again, no pun intended. Or pay millions to consultants to come up with dazzling charts and models about transformation. But without good governance, that will just be public relations and empty rhetoric. Failure in governance would include corruption in high office, lack of transparency in government dealings, and breakdown of accountability. And I might add, one of the major or key issues the five generals have been harping in the series of public speeches is the lack of transparency in procurement policy. They cited specific examples how they buy, the politicians decide to buy some equipment or armaments for 200 million and the bill comes to 450 million. And this has to stop. Leakages, corruption, exorbitant expenditure from the report of the Auditor General, we find or conclude that the loss annually comes to about 20 billion ringgit. So we are a relatively rich country. We can afford to lose 20 billion and we're still doing relatively okay. I think if the same amount is lost, say in Zimbabwe, the country will go bankrupt very soon. So there must be meaningful structural reforms that will change the dynamics of how we want the nation's economic pie to expand. Investments in new sectors must be encouraged, but allowing this to be monopolized by the elite few is a definite no. No way can the Petronas contracts be monopolized by Mahathir's son. Okay. People ask, what do I go beyond that? No, I'm not going to touch him. If and when we do take over, I will leave him alone. But no way will I behave like Najib, because I will not tolerate the monopoly of contracts to the children of ministers or prime ministers or ex-prime ministers. And again, there's no way, no country in the world that I know of, Professor Wu, and they're experts here, I'm not able to recall even the worst semi-authoritarian regimes that would tolerate the disbursement of contracts or privatizations to one company, from rice to sugar to port to airport to train, railways to car, Proton to Puspacorp to Post to the Syed Mokhtar company. I mean, this of course has to be reviewed, because no country, if you want to talk about in terms of sustainability and good governance, could ever condone this. Now, by saying this, I think that company worth billions would support UMNO in the elections, and we'll be a bit slightly in trouble. So I need your support. We have nothing against big corporations, but the priority is job creation and how these corporations fare in the overall scheme of social justice, which indeed will be inseparable from the principles of economic management. Now, another crucial area of concern is the balance between state-dominated ventures and private investment. We have enough examples of private ventures, particularly those in providing basic utilities, which act more like oppressors of the people. Because they are protected by Putrajaya, they are not responsive to the people's call for better service, let alone for more reasonable rates. In the international arena, our competitiveness must surely be another key area of focus for economic management, not just in the transition period, but for medium and long-term sustainable growth. The list is indeed long as to what we can do and what we must do for this crucial stage of our nation's destiny. Suffice to say that in these deliberations, we are not just looking at pie charts, numbers and data, important as they are, but at the fundamental issues of governance. I reiterate, the fundamental issues of governance. The crux, the fundamental difference between Pakatan Rakyat and Barisan Nasional is the issue of governance. In all these, we must remain steadfast in being guided by the safeguards and the best practices of a constitutional democracy. Economic management is not a game of one-upmanship, but the duty of the highest calling to be discharged for the well-being of the nation and the welfare of the people. Terima kasih.